The courtroom froze when a 17-year-old boy walked in wearing an oversized suit and glasses. Everyone laughed, even the judge, until he opened his briefcase. Because this teenager wasn't there to watch. He was there to win. What happened next shocked the entire courtroom and changed lives forever. The courtroom fell silent the moment he walked in. The heavy oak doors creaked as a thin, nervous-looking teenager stepped forward, clutching a black briefcase that seemed far too large for him. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Who's the kid? Did someone lose their intern? Must be a mistake. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and a voice that could slice through steel, lifted her glasses and frowned. "Excuse me, young man," she said, tapping her gavel once. "This isn't a school field trip. Where's your guardian?" Everyone chuckled. Even the clerk tried to hide a grin. But the boy didn't laugh. He stood a little taller, adjusted his slightly oversized suit, and said calmly, "I'm here to represent the defendant, Your Honor." A pause. Then laughter exploded across the room. "Represent," a lawyer in the back snorted. "Kid, this is a courtroom, not a debate club." "Somebody call security," another joked. Even the bailiff smirked, folding his arms. "Son, do you even know what a defendant is?" The boy's voice stayed steady. "Yes, sir. It means someone accused, but not yet proven guilty." He placed his briefcase on the defense table and clicked it open. "And that's why I'm here. To prove her innocence." The laughter quieted a little. Something in his tone, not arrogance, not defiance, but certainty, made people hesitate. The judge sighed, rubbing her temples. "Young man, what's your name?" "Ethan Cole." "And your age?" "17, ma'am." The courtroom buzzed again. 17. This is ridiculous. Where's his lawyer? Ethan didn't flinch. He looked toward the woman sitting beside him, a middle-aged lady with tear-streaked cheeks and trembling hands. She looked terrified, her clothes worn, her posture small. That was Lydia Barnes, a struggling single mother accused of stealing $10,000 from her employer. A powerful businessman sitting smugly across the room. Ethan turned to her gently. "Don't worry, ma'am," he whispered. "Just tell the truth. I'll handle the rest." The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Cole, I'm only allowing you to speak because this case is already delayed, and the defendant has no legal counsel present. But understand, this is highly irregular. If you waste this court's time, I'll have you removed immediately." Ethan nodded. "Understood, Your Honor." He took a deep breath. Then, calmly, confidently, he began. "Ladies and gentlemen, I know I don't look like much. I'm young. I don't wear an expensive suit. I don't have a degree framed behind my desk. But what I do have is the truth." The crowd murmured again. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Go on, Mr. Cole. Enlighten us." Ethan held up a document from his briefcase. Lydia's employee records. "Your Honor, this document says Lydia was working the morning the theft supposedly occurred. But the transaction log shows the money was withdrawn at 3:47 p.m., 3 hours after her shift ended." The prosecutor stood. "Objection. This boy isn't qualified to present evidence." The judge hesitated. Normally, that objection would hold. But there was something magnetic about Ethan's composure. "Overruled," she said finally. "Let's see where this goes." Ethan nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Your Honor." He pointed at the document again. Now, the company's surveillance footage conveniently went missing that same day. Isn't that strange? The cameras worked perfectly the day before and the day after. The prosecutor rolled his eyes. Coincidence. Ethan turned sharply. "Then how do you explain this?" He pulled another page from his briefcase, a printed email chain. This email shows that the system administrator deleted the footage under direct orders from one person, the company's owner, Mr. Richard Hale. The courtroom went dead silent. The businessman's smirk faded instantly. "Objection," the prosecutor shouted again. "That's a private company document." Ethan looked at the judge. "Your Honor, this email was provided by a whistleblower who risked their job to expose the truth. Shouldn't we at least verify its authenticity?" The judge stared at the page. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Proceed." Ethan's voice grew stronger now. "Lydia Barnes didn't steal $10,000. She was framed by her employer. The so-called missing footage and altered bank logs are proof. The audience gasped. Even the bailiff looked stunned. The judge leaned back in her chair, studying Ethan carefully. That's a bold accusation for someone who shouldn't even be in this courtroom. Ethan didn't waver. Maybe. But truth doesn't care about age or permission, Your Honor. There was silence again, the heavy, powerful kind that fills a room when everyone realizes something extraordinary is happening. Finally, the judge said softly, "You claim this employer tampered with evidence. Do you have proof?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Yes, ma'am. If the court allows, I can prove it within 10 minutes. The judge hesitated, then gestured to the clerk. "Very well. You have 10 minutes, Mr. Cole." Ethan opened his laptop, projecting security metadata on the courtroom screen. "Look here. The file labeled footage_23.mp4. See the timestamp? It was created 2 days after the supposed theft. That means the video was rear-recorded." He zoomed in on a faint reflection visible in the footage. "And this reflection in the glass? That's the same watch Mr. Hale is wearing right now." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled notes. Even the prosecutor's jaw dropped. Mr. Hale stood, furious. "This is nonsense. You can't accuse me of..." The judge slammed her gavel. "Enough." She turned to Ethan, eyes wide with something between disbelief and admiration. "Mr. Cole, how did you even notice that?" Ethan glanced down, almost shyly. "My father was a lawyer. Before he passed, he told me, always look at what others ignore. So I did." The judge sat back slowly, her stern expression softening. And for the first time that morning, she smiled. "Well, Mr. Cole," she said, her tone almost proud, "it seems this courtroom has underestimated you." Ethan closed his laptop, straightened his tie, and said quietly, "Then let me prove I belong here." And in that moment, that exact second, the laughter stopped. Everyone, from the judge to the janitor, knew they were witnessing something rare. A boy who came to fight for justice, and was already winning. The case was a simple theft accusation, or at least, that's what everyone thought. A poor single mother named Lydia Barnes stood at the defense table, her hands trembling as she clutched a worn handbag. Her eyes were red from sleepless nights, her posture small, fragile, almost invisible in the grand courtroom. Across the room sat her former boss, Richard Hale, a man in his 50s with a silver watch glinting on his wrist and a smirk fixed firmly on his face. His expensive suit spoke louder than any words. To him, this wasn't justice, it was entertainment. He leaned toward his attorney and whispered, just loud enough for the front row to hear, "She'll break before lunch. I know her type, weak, desperate." Lydia's lips quivered as she tried to speak. "I didn't steal anything," she said softly, voice cracking. "I swear I didn't." But no one seemed to care. Her public defender had quit that morning, saying he was too busy to handle such a hopeless case. Truth was, nobody wanted to go up against Hale's powerful lawyers. The man donated to judges, funded campaigns, and crushed reputations without blinking. Until Ethan Cole walked in. The moment he stepped forward, the entire courtroom had laughed. A teenager defending a single mother against a millionaire? It sounded like a bad joke. But Ethan didn't laugh. He adjusted his glasses, set down his briefcase, and met the judge's eyes with quiet confidence. The judge sighed heavily. "All right, young man," she said. "If you insist on embarrassing yourself, I'll let you speak. But remember, this is not a game." Ethan nodded once. "Understood, Your Honor." Then he opened the file, a stack of papers that had already been reviewed and dismissed by half a dozen adults. But his eyes didn't see what theirs did. They saw patterns. They saw discrepancies. They saw truth hiding between the lines. The courtroom was silent except for the faint rustle of paper as he flipped through documents. He paused suddenly, frowning. The audience leaned in. "Your Honor," he said clearly, "the company's transaction log says the theft occurred at 3:47 p.m. on June 10th. He held up another paper. But Ms. Barnes' time card shows she clocked out at 12:30 that day, and her signature matches perfectly. The judge blinked. "Go on," Ethan continued, flipping to another document. Now look here, the deposit slip. The handwriting doesn't match hers. The B in Barnes loops differently, and the signature slants to the right instead of left. Lydia looked up, confused. How did you notice that? Ethan gave a small smile. Because someone wanted it to look close enough to fool the system, not close enough to fool the truth. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Even the prosecutor frowned and whispered something to his assistant. The judge leaned forward, curious despite herself. Mr. Cole, are you suggesting this document was forged? Ethan looked straight at her. I'm not suggesting, Your Honor. I'm proving it. The judge arched a brow. And how exactly will you do that? Ethan took a breath. I'd like to request access to the security footage and financial logs from the week the money went missing. Instantly, the room erupted with whispers. What does this kid think he's doing? He's watched too many detective shows. Security footage? He won't find anything. Even Lydia looked lost. She tugged at his sleeve, whispering, Ethan, there isn't any footage. They told me the cameras were down that week. Ethan turned to her gently. And that's exactly why I want to see it. The judge narrowed her eyes, intrigued now. You have an hour, she said finally. But if this turns out to be a waste of the court's time, I will personally hold you in contempt. Understood? Ethan nodded respectfully. Understood, Your Honor. As the recess was called, people began to talk, not about the case, but about him. Who is that kid? He talks like he's been doing this for years. He's just stalling. The judge will crush him. Lydia sat down beside him, voice barely above a whisper. Why are you doing this for me? You don't even know me. Ethan looked at her, eyes calm but filled with something older than his age. Because I know what it's like to be blamed for something you didn't do. My dad was a lawyer, and he taught me that real justice doesn't wait for permission. For the first time, Lydia smiled, just a small, fragile one, but it was enough to steady her shaking hands. Across the room, Hale's attorney scoffed. He's buying himself time. The cameras were conveniently broken. He'll find nothing. But Ethan didn't seem worried. As the courtroom emptied, he sat quietly at the defense table, staring at the documents again, connecting lines only he could see. When the clerk returned with the company's data drive and transaction report, Ethan opened his laptop immediately. He clicked fast, his brow furrowing, his mind racing. What are you looking for? Lydia asked softly. He pointed at the screen. This file, transaction_0610, was edited twice. Once on the 10th and again on the 12th. But the company report only mentions one update. So, she asked. So, he said, someone tried to change the timestamp. Whoever did it wanted to make sure the theft appeared during your shift hours. Lydia gasped. Then that means... Yes, Ethan said. It means someone's lying. Before the recess ended, Ethan had already listed out timestamps, emails, and anomalies in his notebook. Every page was filled with scribbles, arrows, and calculations. And when the bailiff called, court is back in session. Ethan stood up, his expression calm but determined. The same people who laughed earlier now watched in silence as he walked toward the center of the courtroom, holding a USB drive. He glanced briefly at Lydia. Ready? She nodded, hope flickering in her tired eyes for the first time in months. Ethan turned to the judge. Your Honor, he said clearly, I have reason to believe that not only was the evidence tampered with, but the person responsible is sitting in this very courtroom. Gasps echoed through the gallery. Hale stiffened in his chair. The judge's gavel struck once, hard. Order. Mr. Cole, that's a serious accusation. Ethan met her gaze, unwavering. Yes, ma'am. And I intend to prove it. The judge's expression changed, skepticism giving way to curiosity. You have 1 hour, she said. Ethan smiled faintly, adjusting his tie. That's all I need. And as the audience whispered and the cameras clicked, one thing became crystal clear. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was a battle between power and truth. And the boy they mocked had just declared war. The courtroom filled again, the tension thicker than before. Reporters whispered. Cameras flashed. Even the air felt charged with curiosity. Because everyone wanted to see what the 17-year-old kid lawyer would do next. Ethan Cole stood calmly at the defense table, laptop open, notes perfectly arranged. Across from him, Richard Hale, the millionaire employer, looked confident, leaning back with folded arms. He whispered to his lawyer, smirking, "Let's end this circus. I've got a meeting in an hour." The judge tapped her gavel. "Mr. Cole," she said firmly, "you have 1 hour to prove your claim. Proceed." Ethan nodded once, his voice calm but clear. "Your Honor, I'd like to start with the company's financial transaction records from the week of June 10th. You'll see that the withdrawal of $10,000 was made from an employee account under the name Lydia Barnes." He projected the file onto the courtroom screen. A list of transactions appeared neat and ordinary, except for one entry highlighted in red. "That's the supposed theft," Ethan said. "At first glance, it looks convincing. But if you pay attention, you'll see something strange." He pointed with a laser pen. "The timestamp says 3:47 p.m., but the system's security log shows the user login happened at 3:04 p.m. The withdrawal took 43 minutes for a transaction that should take less than 30 seconds. The prosecutor frowned. "And what does that prove, Mr. Cole?" "Delays happen." Ethan smiled slightly. "True. Delays happen when someone is editing a record manually." The audience murmured. The judge leaned forward. "Are you suggesting the record was tampered with?" "Yes, Your Honor. And I can show you who did it." He clicked again, revealing the metadata panel on the screen. Lines of code, timestamps, and usernames. "This code," Ethan continued, "shows an override by an admin account. The username is hidden, but the IP address, well, that's public." He typed rapidly. Lines of numbers appeared, followed by a company ID. "This address," he said, "traces directly to the office of the CEO, Mr. Richard Hale." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, a few gasps louder than others. Hale's lawyer jumped up. "Objection. This child has no authority to access confidential data. This is hacking." Ethan didn't flinch. "The data was provided legally by the court clerk after my request, Your Honor. Nothing was accessed illegally. Everything you see is in the official system logs." The judge raised an eyebrow. "And you're sure these results are accurate?" "Absolutely," Ethan said. "If you'd like, I can replicate it live." The judge hesitated, then nodded. "Do it." Ethan began typing again, explaining each step as he worked. His hands moved fast but precise, like someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. He cross-checked the company's digital certificate, matched the timestamps, then pulled up a duplicate log. Within seconds, the evidence appeared on screen. User, admin_LR, manual override, June 12, 3:04 p.m. Silence. Then chaos. Hale stood abruptly, face red. "This is absurd. That's my account, yes, but anyone in my office could have used it." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "True. Anyone could have, if not for one detail." He clicked again. The footage of the office appeared on screen, security camera stills that had been marked damaged. The crowd gasped. Ethan zoomed in. This footage was deleted, but later restored by the data recovery system. And here, he paused dramatically, is the moment the logs were edited. The image showed Hale himself, sitting at his desk, typing on his computer, the silver watch on his wrist gleaming under the office lights. Ethan looked up, meeting his eyes. "Same watch you're wearing today, sir." The courtroom fell deathly silent. The judge stared at the screen, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Hale," she said slowly, "do you have an explanation?" Hale stammered. This is taken out of context. I was reviewing files. I didn't steal." Ethan interrupted politely but firmly. "You didn't need to. You only had to move money between accounts to make it look like Lydia did." He pulled up one final chart. Side-by-side graphs showing Hale's account balance before and after the theft. The $10,000 was transferred to a temporary holding account, then redirected to one under Mr. Hale's name 2 days later. The trail is invisible to most, but not to someone who knows how to look. The judge turned to Hale's attorney. "Would you like to respond?" The attorney opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing left to say. Ethan walked over to Lydia. his tone soft now. Ma'am, you said you left work early that day to take your daughter to the hospital. Do you have proof? Lydia nodded nervously and handed him a paper. I kept the bill. Ethan smiled. Your Honor, here's her hospital admission slip, time-stamped at 1:15 p.m., nearly 3 hours before the supposed theft. The judge took the document, scanned it, then looked up at the prosecution table. Is there any objection to this evidence? None. She leaned back slowly, tapping her gavel once. Case dismissed. Ms. Barnes, you're free to go. The courtroom exploded with applause. Lydia burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. Ethan placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. You're free now. It's over. Across the room, officers escorted Hale out in handcuffs. His smirk was gone. As the noise swelled, the judge raised her voice over the crowd. Mr. Cole, she said, a faint smile appearing for the first time that day. I must admit, I've never seen reasoning that sharp from someone twice your age. How did you learn to do all this? Ethan looked down, his voice quiet. My dad used to be a lawyer. He taught me everything before he passed away. He said, justice doesn't care how old you are. It only listens to those brave enough to speak for it. The judge nodded slowly, visibly moved. Your father would be proud. Ethan smiled faintly. I hope so, ma'am. As the courtroom emptied, Lydia hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, Ethan. You saved my life. He shook his head. No, ma'am. The truth did. Outside, cameras flashed, microphones swarmed, and reporters shouted questions. But Ethan simply walked past them all, holding his worn briefcase, heading into the sunlight, quiet, humble, and victorious. He didn't need applause. He didn't need headlines. Because he knew one thing for sure. The fight for justice had only just begun. The courtroom had emptied out, but the echoes of applause still lingered in the air. Outside, reporters swarmed the steps of the courthouse, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. Ethan Cole. Who taught you law? Are you really 17? Did you just outsmart a millionaire? But Ethan didn't answer. He slipped through the side exit, clutching his old briefcase like a shield, his expression calm but distant. For everyone else, it was the story of the year. A teenage genius humiliates a millionaire in court. But for Ethan, it was personal. He walked down the courthouse steps and found Lydia waiting near the sidewalk, tears still glistening in her eyes. She held a small paper bag in her hands. I didn't know what else to give you, she said softly. Just some homemade cookies. It's not much, but... Ethan smiled gently and took the bag. It's more than enough, Ms. Barnes. She hesitated, then asked, why did you really do this for me? You didn't even know me. Ethan looked away for a moment, watching the traffic pass. His voice dropped lower. Because my mom once stood where you did, accused of something she didn't do. She didn't get a second chance. Lydia's eyes widened. Your mother? Ethan nodded slowly. She worked as an accountant. Her boss framed her for fraud. My dad tried to defend her himself, but the evidence was stacked against them. The truth came out too late. She couldn't live with the shame. His voice cracked slightly, but he steadied himself. After that, my dad left his law firm and taught me everything he knew. He said if I ever saw injustice again, I shouldn't wait for someone older or richer to fix it. Lydia's eyes filled again, but this time not from fear, from understanding. She reached out and squeezed his hand gently. Your parents raised a remarkable boy, Ethan. He smiled faintly. They raised someone who hates seeing good people punished for bad men's lies. Back inside the courthouse, Judge Marlowe sat in her chambers, staring at the case file still on her desk. She had presided over hundreds of trials, but never one like this. A 17-year-old boy had walked into her courtroom, defied logic, and exposed corruption in less than 2 hours. She picked up the phone. Call the clerk, she said. I want to verify this boy's background. 10 minutes later, her assistant stepped in, holding a printout. You won't believe this, Judge. What did you find? He's not even enrolled in any college yet. He's still a high school student, homeschooled. His father, Matthew Cole, was a defense attorney. Very respected. Died in an accident 5 years ago. The judge frowned. Matthew Cole. I knew that name. He once argued before me. Her assistant nodded. There's more. His son, Ethan, has been submitting papers to local law journals, anonymously. Some of them were published. Judge Marlowe leaned back in her chair, astonished. He's been studying law on his own? Yes, ma'am. Since he was 12. She exhaled slowly, almost smiling. Well, that explains it. Then she looked out the window at the fading daylight. But the question is, how far will he go? Later that evening, as the city lights flickered on, Ethan returned to a small apartment on the edge of downtown. The place was modest, old wallpaper, stacks of law books, and a dusty photograph of a man in a brown suit smiling proudly beside a younger version of Ethan. He placed his briefcase on the table and sat in silence for a moment. Then he looked up at the photo. Dad, he whispered, I did it. I won my first case. He chuckled softly, but his eyes glistened. I can still hear you saying it. Don't fight for fame, son. Fight for the ones who can't fight for themselves. He reached into his bag and pulled out Lydia's thank you note, a simple, handwritten card that said, You reminded me that good people still exist. He set it beside his father's photo. For the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to breathe, really breathe. The case was over, but the mission wasn't. The next morning, a knock came at his door. When he opened it, he found Judge Marlowe standing there in civilian clothes, holding a folder. Your Honor, he said, startled. She smiled. Call me Rebecca. May I come in? Ethan stepped aside nervously. Of course. She looked around, noticing the books, the notes, the whiteboard filled with scribbled legal theories. You've turned your home into a courtroom, she said softly. He laughed lightly. It's the only one that doesn't ask for a law degree. The judge set the folder down on the table. Inside are recommendations. 3 law schools have already contacted me. They saw the footage from the hearing. They want to offer you full scholarships. Ethan blinked in disbelief. Wait, you're serious? Completely. She paused, her tone warm but serious. But Ethan, promise me something. Promise me you'll use that mind of yours for justice, not for power. He met her gaze, his voice steady. I promise. The judge smiled, extending her hand. Then the world's about to meet its youngest lawyer. As she left, Ethan stepped onto the balcony, the morning sun painting the city gold. Below, people rushed to work, unaware that somewhere above them stood a boy who had just changed everything. He looked out, wind brushing through his hair, and whispered softly, Dad, I'm just getting started. He turned back inside, eyes falling once more on the old briefcase on his table. The initials engraved on it read, MC Matthew Cole. Ethan traced the letters with his fingers, then packed it up again. Tomorrow, there would be another courtroom, another fight, another voice that needed to be heard. And though he was just 17, the world was already calling him something new, the boy who defended justice. The news spread faster than wildfire. Within days, every major channel was talking about him, the 17-year-old genius who outsmarted a millionaire. Clips of Ethan's calm, fearless argument in court went viral. People all around the world were amazed and inspired. Students started quoting his lines in debates. Parents showed their kids his photos saying, See, age doesn't define brilliance. But Ethan wasn't celebrating. He sat in the same small apartment, flipping through case files he'd collected over the years. All people like Lydia. All stories where justice had failed. Because while the world saw a prodigy, Ethan saw unfinished business. A week later, a letter arrived at his door. It was official, a full scholarship to Rutherford Law University, one of the most prestigious law schools in the country. He held it in his hands, speechless. For most kids, this would have been the dream. But Ethan didn't smile right away. Instead, he turned the envelope over and saw something written on the back, a note from Judge Marlowe herself. You reminded us that justice isn't about age or power. It's about courage. Never lose that. Ethan placed the letter on the table beside his father's photo. He whispered, You were right, Dad. The world does listen, if you make them. A few days later, Lydia visited him again, this time with her young daughter, Emma. The little girl ran up to Ethan and hugged him tightly. "Mom says you're a hero," she said, beaming. Ethan laughed softly, kneeling to her height. "I'm no hero, Emma. I just told the truth." "But nobody believed Mom before," the girl said. "You made them listen." That line hit him like lightning. You made them listen. It wasn't about being right. It was about giving voice to those who were ignored. And in that moment, Ethan made a decision that would shape his entire life. He wouldn't just go to law school. He'd use his voice to help others find theirs. Months passed. Ethan attended Rutherford, quickly becoming the youngest and most brilliant student they'd ever had. Professors were stunned by his insight, his calm confidence, and his unwavering sense of justice. But he never bragged, never boasted. He'd often volunteer in the community center, offering free advice to struggling families facing unfair landlords or false accusations. "Why you work so hard?" one classmate asked him one evening. "You've already made history." Ethan smiled faintly. "Because history doesn't matter if people are still suffering today." One afternoon, after a guest lecture, a man in a tailored suit approached him. He was tall, well-spoken, a partner at one of the country's biggest law firms. "Ethan Cole," the man said, extending a hand. "You've made quite the impression. We'd like you to intern with us this summer." Ethan looked at the logo on the man's folder, Graymont and Company, the same firm that had once employed his mother's old boss, the man who had ruined her life. For a moment, his breath hitched. He remembered her tears, her hopelessness. Then he smiled calmly and said, "Thank you, sir. But I think I'll start my own firm someday, one that fights against the kind of men who destroy innocent lives." The man's confident smile faltered. Ethan shook his hand politely and walked away, his resolve stronger than ever. Years passed. Ethan graduated top of his class, his story still whispered in law schools and classrooms around the country. He opened a small legal foundation in his father's name, the Cold Justice Project, dedicated to defending people who couldn't afford lawyers. Lydia became his assistant. Emma, now a teenager, volunteered after school. And on the front wall of his office, engraved in silver letters, were the words his father had told him long ago. "Don't fight for fame. Fight for the ones who can't fight for themselves." One rainy evening, as Ethan prepared for another case, he received a call from Judge Marlowe. Her voice was softer now, but filled with pride. "I've been watching your work, Ethan," she said. "Your foundation's helping hundreds. You've become everything this system needed, and everything your father hoped you'd be." Ethan smiled. "Thank you, Judge. But I'm just getting started." She chuckled. "You always say that." "I always mean it," he replied. That night, after the call, he walked out onto the balcony again, just like he had years ago after winning his first case. The rain fell softly, the city lights reflecting in the puddles below. He looked up at the sky, whispering, "Mom, Dad, I hope you're proud." Then he turned and saw Emma standing behind him, holding a law textbook. She grinned. "Mr. Cole, can you teach me how to argue like you?" Ethan laughed, patting her shoulder. "It's not about arguing, Emma. It's about believing." "Believing in what?" "In truth," he said. "And in people, even when the world doesn't." As soft piano music fades in, the narrator's voice deepens. Sometimes, heroes don't wear capes or badges. Sometimes, they walk into courtrooms, trembling underestimated, and remind the world that truth doesn't need permission to speak. Ethan Cole didn't just defend one woman. He defended justice itself. And that's what makes him unforgettable. The screen fades to black as text appears. Inspired by true acts of courage. Never stop fighting for what's right.